Jungian coaching means that we bring a Jungian perspective to the coaching process. In this video, I'll explain first what coaching is, and next I'll go into Jungian coaching specifically. If you're already familiar with the coaching process, you can also skip this initial part and go to the next chapter in which I'll address Jungian coaching. But first, let me identify or define the coaching process. Coaching is a short-term way of guiding people. It's about equal partnership with the aim to maximize a client's potential. And there are several stages in which we do this, and I've written them down in this model. And the first one is that we explore what a client is bringing in. So a client is facing a certain situation, A, and wants to develop and go into a certain direction, B, and what we do in the coaching process is explore what might be hindering someone. So when the client comes in, we first explore who is this client, why are they facing this particular problem, what are they experiencing, how does that make sense with their life's history. So that is the first stage of exploration. Next, we continue with goal setting. Where does the client want to go? Where does the client want to move into what direction? And so we set a goal, and sometimes this is part of a discussion, and sometimes our client already knows this is what I want to achieve. Next, we get into the learning phase in which they, through exercises, through questions, through feedback, through sharing the observation of a coach, there is learning that takes place. The client might take some action, uh, take a pause afterwards, reflect on what's happening, what's working for them, what's not working, and try something else again. So there's a lot of learning taking place. And ultimately, of course, we hope that the client completes their goal that they had initially set. So this is what coaching is talked about in general. Jungian coaching brings the Jungian perspective. So what that really means is that we take the individuation process into account. And the individuation process is the process of psychological development. And there's the assumption in Jungian psychology that like an acorn will turn into an oak tree one day, that the psyche knows what its full potential is and where it wants to go. And as a result, it's not so much that the ego sets the course in life, like this is what I want to do in life, although, of course, the ego is very important because it mediates between the outer demands and the inner demands and tries to navigate it in a way that it maintains and survives. But in Jungian psychology, following this individuation process, our ego is oriented to the self with a capital letter S. And another way of saying exactly the same is the ego orienting to what the psyche wants or what the soul wants. And so it's not so much about realizing your ego's potentials, but it's more about realizing the soul's potentials. By the way, psyche and soul both refer to the same. Psyche is Greek, soul is Latin, and I might use them interchangeably in this talk. So the first two stages in Jungian coaching is like in traditional coaching, we first explore the initial conditions. We want to learn about the client. Who is this client? What do they see as a solution? And next, we want to have another perspective, and that is the perspective of the unconscious, or what else might be there that our ego is not seeing. So, probably this is best illustrated by an example. The example is a client that I had. She dealt with heartbreak and now noticed that she was struggling with connections in the outer world. And she said, I want to be with friends, but I also know that I was in pain and I'm withdrawing from my social interactions, but I want to engage again and I want to be part of it. So here we see a good reading of what a client might come into. in the coaching with, but also realize like, okay, so this is the ego. The ego sees, hey, I'm withdrawing. It is unpleasant. I want to be connected. And so it's striving to be connected again. It wants to fix the situation. And often the ego is about making problems go away, avoiding them, fix it, so that it can live a pleasant and easy and comfortable, energy saving way of life. Now, from a soul's perspective, we want to know what else is there. So the ego says, I'd like to be like I used to be before, connecting a lot with friends, hanging out with them. But I also noticed that there are some tendency that I'm withdrawing, and I want that symptom, if we will. I want to get rid of the symptom. Now, next, we want to look at the soul's wishes, what might be there. And when we look at the soul's wishes, we also take shadow material into account. One way of looking at it from a Jungian point of view is that the ego has a solution. I don't want to withdraw. But from a soul's perspective, we might also look at the same symptom of withdrawing as it carrying a lot of information, partly something about the defense against change. And maybe it even has a little bit of a pointer or a clue in it in which way to go. So, for example, this withdrawing might be a way of the psyche being preventing the person from feeling overwhelmed. There's been a heartbreak, there's been a loss, and now the person feels maybe somewhat vulnerable. And another way of feeling vulnerable is feeling that the other or others or the world is very powerful, and you don't feel very powerful. And in a way, the psyche steps in helping you to prevent that feeling of being overwhelmed. So there it can serve as a little bit as a defense mechanism, but it might also be pointing in which direction to go. Maybe the psyche is withdrawing some of the energy because there's an invitation of you pausing and not continuing the way that you used to continue, but really wait and reflect on what's truly important to you. And in psychology, we sometimes talk about this as the liminal stage. So that is really a transitional period in which you're moving from one identity into a next identity. And that in between stage is called the liminal stage. What is often experienced there is that people feel insecure or maybe a little bit more anxious because the old way of being is not there anymore. But the new way of being, so the new identity, has not emerged yet either. So there's this in between stage that can leave a person quite unsettled. So this is an example of bringing that Jungian perspective to the exploration stage. Let me go back to then to the soul's wish. What we do in this stage is we look at dreams, we look at the daily imaginations, we look at what the client might be projecting on others. We look at um, what intuitions a person has. My preferred way of working is working with the dreams. And I think a lot of people are able to work with dreams just as long as you don't get into all the details and the different layers of dream work. A very easy way and very accessible way for working with dreams, provided your client dreams, of course, because otherwise you would need to make use of one of the other techniques. And both coaches will have a plethora of techniques of working with the unconscious and especially evoking shadow material or learning about it. But one way of working with a dream would be looking at what is the dominant feeling that this dream leaves me? What is it surfacing? What does it want me to face on a conscious level? So, looking at the general feeling in the dream or the dominant feeling in the dream is one way of working with it. And another way is of looking at it is looking at the behavior pattern. I often give the same example. I'm walking on the street, I see a bear, and I run away. The behavior pattern in this small dream example is I see something that evokes fear and I run away from it. So when a client would have a certain dream, I would really wonder, like, is that a pattern that you recognize in daily life as well? That when you see something that frightens you, that you have a tendency to run away from it. And here, of course, you can already hear there's the dynamic of the withdrawing. Like, oh, it might be that there's something fearful, and that the withdrawing is also a fear response. So, looking at dreams really helps us to understand what the client is dealing with. So you have a first coaching session. The client might have a night sleep on it, and comes back. And you ask what stood out in the week, and there might have been something that really resonated with them while they were watching television or reading a book, or they overheard a conversation at the workplace. And there was something that really triggered them, that somehow captured them imagination. Like, for example, they watched television and they saw someone dancing, and there was something like, "Oh, wouldn't that be nice to dance?" And even though the person loves dancing or doesn't love dancing, that's not even that important. It's more on taking that symbolic look, like, "Oh, there's something in the experience of dancing that the soul is longing for, or that suddenly captures the imagination." Or someone is dreaming about painting and really loving it, or there's active thinking about making a journey through life. So when it's a journey, or for example, sailing on the sea, or we follow the image of dancing, and we don't literalize it like, oh, I need to dance, although you might decide to go dancing, but it's really to look at it metaphorically and more symbolically. What would it mean if I would dance more when I'm going through my life, when I do the dancing more on a daily basis? Because dancing requires, of course, that I am doing something, but I'm also partly led by something other. And there's really a co-creation, and how am I co-creating my own life path? Would be an interesting question there. So then in the next stage, we look to deepen a client's understanding, and we can do this in different ways. We can look at the different beliefs that a client has, maybe of the old identity, but also look at the beliefs of the new identity or the desired identity. Or maybe there's no identity yet, and that will be okay too. Um, so there's the deepening of understanding, looking at the beliefs. There's you can look at the stories, and really looking at the deeper motifs or the universal motifs that are present in someone's life. For example, someone has, like this client, had been in a relationship with her husband, was really taking care of the relationship, of the household, and was in a somewhat traditional role and relationship with her husband. And we looked at the deeper dynamics there of her feeling really alive in that role of the wife of. This immediately reminds me of the myth of Hera, who is also taking care, of course, the wife of Zeus. So there's the archetypal motive that might be interesting to look at there as well. And what it means from transitioning from one stage into another stage is also maybe the archetypal presence of one goddess in this case, and it might be replaced by another goddess. And in that in between stage, you only feel the collapse of one story, but there's not the emergence yet of the new story. But when you're working on it, what you usually see is that there is this new image starting to emerge, and you can get a glimpse of the archetypal presence that is showing up. So you can do this in this stage, deepening understanding. You can do voice dialogue, which is a Jungian technique. You can do active imagination. Of course, you continue to look at the projections, at the imagination. You can do all kinds of visualization exercises, um, dream work. So this is in the deep understanding stage. And then the last one, which in the normal coaching is called the completion stage, is really let's revision the story that I've been telling myself. Let's revision when I look back in time how I tell my story, how I tell my life story. But it's not just about the storytelling and the narrative component, but it's also looking at it through a different lens. And maybe looking through a different lens, um, your past begins to change a little bit because what you might have experienced as deeply upsetting as your partner indicating that he wants to leave becomes something that turns out in retrospect to be a very important, painful, yet very meaningful experience because it also was also initiating you into a new stage of life. And so, because your perspective changes, your emotions change, there's a deeper spiritual understanding. And as a result, your ego is more aligned with yourself, or your ego is more aligned with your psyche and the self in the capital letter S. This is what Jungians talk about. Connection from the ego to the self is the ego self axis. Ultimately, in the individuation process, we want our egos to be attuned to the desires of the souls so that we really can ask, what can we be in service to? What does want to live through me rather than who do I want to be? What does my ego want and go and get it? So this is what Jungian coaching is compared to what you heard earlier about coaching. Now let's quickly look at the skills that a coach needs. The coach needs foundational skills, knowing about how to have a practice, know about the ethical considerations. It they need relationship skills. It's really about developing a good rapport with your client, but also realizing that that relationship is key in the process. A lot of research shows that relationship in therapy, in coaching, in mentoring, in teachers is really key. But you also need to have clear communication skills so that the client and you have the good interaction. So it's really tied to the relationship skills that you have. And you need to know about learning and how to facilitate a learning process and knowing about how change can come about. Jungian coaching is exactly the same. You will need exactly the same skills. So that is not different. There's only one thing that you need additionally to it. And the thing that you need additionally is a Jungian perspective on life. That is something unique to Jungian coaching because it influences every step along the way and how you go about it. That's it for Jungian coaching when I compare it to traditional coaching.